Sick Harrison Price from the historic Wall Center. We go coast to coast here, Blake. We welcome in one of the keenest eyes in Canadian sports, author, columnist from Woody Point, Newfoundland. He's got a place in Woody Point, Newfoundland, and every morning he goes out catching. Not fishing, because fishing would mean some days you're unsuccessful, but Stephen Brunt is always successful. Thank you for joining us after a morning catching. Salmon today, was it?
Yeah, no, Atlantic salmon out here on the fly. It's we're having a decent season, and I released a nice fish this morning, and even when you don't, I'm standing on a river in the middle of Grossmore National Park in one of the most beautiful places in Canada. Like no bad days there, right?
Yeah, I defer to my fly fishing king here. I fish off a boat. I feel like I'm the cheap version of you.
You're playing double A here.
Exactly.
You're playing at the Nat. Steve's playing at Run.
That's right.
That's right. Brunt, we wanted to go on today because the North American Soccer Project here, now that all three host nations are finished at the World Cup, and of course, Mexico has already won over. The last frontier commercially for the World's game is the USA and Canada. Both sides got to the knockout round. Both sides won a knockout stage game. Both sides lost by 3 goals in the round of 16, and yet you look at the scenes and the celebration of this sport. In our country, I'm not sure how much you've caught of Vancouver, both Jackpool Plaza down at the Watch Party at TSN, but Granville Street, the Fan Fest out at the PNE, but also on the streets of America, which caught me a little bit by surprise.
Seattle went gaga for
Dallas,
this.
Houston, Seattle. I was there on the weekend, and the way they just absolutely went crazy for this tournament and this event. Give me your update. How is the soccer project doing in North America after this tournament?
Yeah, and I will say I was home in Toronto for those Canada-Bosnia games, so I did get to see a little bit of this firsthand, which was a spectacular experience in a lot of ways, and one that I never thought in my lifetime I'd see a World Cup game in Canada with Canada in a World Cup game in Canada. That seemed impossible when they put in the bid originally. I thought, I remember when people started talking about Canada as a host, they're delusional. Like, we can't qualify for the World Cup. Really, we're going to host it. But you think of where things have come. You know what, Matt? I was thinking. I thought a lot about. I covered the '94 World Cup, USA '94. Right, that's the first one I covered. And the difference between then and now in the United States is, I'm not sure people have processed quite how much has changed in that. I know that's a long stretch of time, but in '94. The games were, they were games played in NFL stadiums in front of people from far away who came to watch their team, and in front of Americans who were kind of curious. But it wasn't like, there was they're like when Ireland played Italy in New York, right? That was a scene for sure. But it was all people rooting for Ireland or rooting for Italy. I saw Brazil play Sweden in the Pontiac Silverdome, which was it just felt odd, right? Everything about it felt like something had descended from somewhere else and dropped into the middle of America, but there was no real engagement. And that World Cup obviously spawned M.L.S. The American men's national team, even though they sucked last night, they have been to the quarterfinals in the World Cup, and I have been on I've been on the road in other World Cups where there are American Germany and in Japan, Korea, where there are American soccer fans on the road, American soccer culture. It's a specific thing. But it's real. It's not it's not that kind of cargo cult. Let's imitate what they do in England or Italy. It's its own thing. And what you've seen now is look, and it's also decades of people being able to watch the Premier League and being able to watch the Champions League, and being tuned into this sport on a level that we weren't growing up. Most Americans weren't even 20 years ago. It's part of the language. It's the sports radio language. I'm sure I heard some terrible soccer talk on ESPN radio this last week driving through the park in Woody Point.
But they were having it. Right?
They were talking about it.
Yeah.
No clue what they're talking about, but they talked about it.
Yeah.
So it's happened. I guess that's what I would say is that it's happened. And I don't.
Stephen, I was on CNN last night. Talking about the World Cup. Like what? Like what?
Was Brunt not available?
Yeah, exactly.
On CNN?
Wow. They're talking soccer on the U.S. networks. who'd have thought? Like, and yet,
Yeah.
and a lot of it's misguided. There's a lot of neophytes out there, but no, there is some legit conversation out there. And to me, that's where they've reached the next level. They've sort of percolated at the same level. They're on that second tier, trying to bounce into the top tier of actual on the pitch soccer. But I think the discourse and the fandom, that's what we have seen jump to the next level. Fair?
Yeah, and that that what that begets, and continues to, is going to be participation, is going to be money. Corporate money. It's going to be athletes, young athletes choosing, that is their sport. That American team is diverse. It's representative of of the United States in that sense. It's inclusive, like a lot of things in America aren't right now. Like how you can see why, like their program will get better. Then they have, the big population. They have, massive college sports system. There's a lot of things, happening there that would suggest that they'll get better. And they, that this is not the end of something. This is, we're still kind of at the very beginning or in the middle of something.
Yeah. I've long argued you've got millions of kids in the sunnier climes who are breaking their backs trying to play 4 to 6 years in the NFL, or facing the longest odds of them all to try and make it in the NBA, when if they were aware of how great a living one could make in global soccer, might turn to that sport, save their brains a little bit, and get an easier
Freeman's
pathway,
son did figure that out.
an easier pathway to a paycheck as a pro athlete, right? So.
Yeah, it's funny. You do see those, the kids of athletes from other sports playing soccer, right?
Yes.
There's a pattern here, right? And again, if you had a kid who was incredibly athletically gifted, which way would you steer them?
Right.
I think I'd say, hey, here's this sport's pretty good.
Let's bring it closer to home here, Steve, because, of course, the U.S. the biggest economy and the frontier that FIFA and global soccer wants to conquer. But here on the ground in Canada, what do you think this tournament and this performance by the Canadian national team did for the sport going forward?
I think it did a ton. I tip the cap to the great Vancouver at Victor Montagliani for one of the guys who believed in this thing and is again sitting at the right hand of power these days in FIFA. God love him. I hope maybe he'll be the boss, and maybe they throw Infantino out over this last thing, and our Vic can run it, and then that'd be very good for Canada. But no, I think in some ways we were what I said about America is it's the same thing here, right? That soccer literacy has grown exponentially over the last 25 or 30 years. It used to be very kind of exclusionary, the soccer culture in this country, right? Like if you weren't, if you couldn't say that, your parents grew up outside the San Siro or something, they didn't want to talk to you, right? It was all about the Euro-centric and South American-centric stuff and all about the old country. And, I remember I did a speech at a Canada soccer banquet once where I essentially called them out on that. It wasn't very popular, but so you got to let people in. It's not your little club here of and stop. Not everybody should have an English accent on the broadcast and all that stuff. But we're still getting by that one apparently. But yeah, I think the universality of soccer, the success of the team. Obviously, you got to I 8-1 Honduras. I don't think a lot of people were all pumped up at that moment about the future of, but what the women have done, which is a different game and a different depth of field, and they did it in the Olympics, not in the World Cup, but that was kind of the precursor of this. And then obviously Qatar and qualifying legitimately and beating the Americans and beating Mexico and doing all the stuff we did in that qualifying. And now looking at that roster where they play a really pleasing brand of football. There's some stars there. It's not it's not Kitty bar the door. Like they're a positive attacking team under Jesse Marsh. Jesse Marsh himself, although I know he's not to everybody's taste. And, kind of hitting all their goals in this World Cup. If they hadn't gotten out of the group, if they didn't get a win, if they didn't win the South Africa game even, maybe we're having it's a little bit different. But again, all arrows are pointing up. But the big one in Canada is money. That's the big one, right? Because Canada Soccer has always had money problems. That's why they did the deal, the Canada Soccer business deal, to try and get money. But, number one, there's prize money, direct prize money, millions of dollars that come with reaching around to 16 in the World Cup. But the corporate money is going to pile on now. And I think they're going to get a national training center out of this. I think this is going to be good for the Canadian Premier League.
Well, it's got to be right.
All of the grassroots stuff.
Stephen, it's got to be for the CPL because there's ownership issues in the CPL right now already. The Whitecaps are in trouble, as we know as well.
CF Montreal as well.
Can those programs all be saved by this corporate money, which theoretically, and I fully agree with you, that it should be coming, given if you are a CEO of whoever and you watch this interest, don't you want to be involved? Theoretically, it should happen, but it's got to happen. We need concrete money here involved.
Yeah. The MLS one's tricky, though, right? And again, in your town and in Montreal, both. And that has more to do with the skyrocketing franchise values in the league, which frankly, money in, money out, I don't understand. But those teams are worth enormous amounts of money on the open market right now. And, the temptation, especially in BC where you don't have you need a stadium solution there and you need, a bunch of things to happen. The temptation to just say, yeah, buy it from me, I will cash in, take all our money and get out of this thing. Especially now, it's not so much, again, not an issue in BC with the stadium if they stayed there, but going to the winter schedule, going to the world schedule, which they're going to do. Matt, you lived in Montreal. You want to go to a soccer game in Montreal in February, outdoors? And they're talking about the Olympic Stadium, for God's sake. Anyway, that's the definition.
Garber praised the Olympic Stadium, Steve. He went to Montreal and he held a press conference saying how wowed he was by the Olympic Stadium for a Montreal machine game of the defunct World Football League.
I've called a
30 years
CF game
I watched that game.
I've called a CF Montreal game in there. Yeah. It is a decade away from being ready.
Stephen,
there's hot dog wrappers that I left there in 1988, right? They're still sitting there. There's layers of dust this deep. So there's an issue with those, with both MLS teams. The Toronto team, ownership wise, obviously there's no issue. I still think playing in the winter is going to be not great, and we'll see. And there's that franchise has not exactly thrived since back in their championship days. And I hate to say that, if there was less of an MLS presence in Canada, maybe there's more room for the CPL, but that may be true. And MLS is a funny league. And again, I don't want to speak for the way it is in Vancouver, but it's funny. It's in Toronto very much. It's people follow the team. There's a hardcore that follow the team. Very few people follow the league, and that's partially because of the broadcast deal, where you just can't see the games, unless you really want to pay for it. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the future of MLS is. I think this will help the Canadian Premier League on that kind of grassroots scale that they're trying to exist on. And you're right, they've been walking a very fine line, early in their history. But, they have had, there's been CPL players capped for Canada. There's been a bunch of them, right? That's the point, right? They're not all going to be superstars, but there needs to be a pipeline for domestic players, and that's not MLS.
Well, 11 of the players on the Canadian men's national team played in MLS academies, though, right? The national team is being populated.
Academies for sure. Yeah.
The academies do not exist outside of the franchise. If the franchises disappear, the academies disappear immediately. So,
our academies would disappear. The MLS academies would go on, right?
Well, in Vegas or wherever, yes.
Yeah, but.
So the national team is that pipeline.
If you're an elite young player, at some point one of these academies comes calling. No, is that not how it works?
I think
they're pretty local.
One thing they're going to get at, I would say one thing I think is going to come out of this, again, something concrete. I think they're going to get a national training center, because they've been talking about it, and there's no dough, or there wasn't enough dough, and there wasn't enough corporate support. But a national training center would be extraordinarily important. So I think that, if nothing else, that'll come out of this. But I think, look, that team, the younger part of the team we just saw is going to qualify 4 years from now and are going to be fun to watch. And there's more upside there. And there's going to be kids pushing their way through. And, again, not the depth that the Americans have, but enough. So if we're in the conversation every 4 years, if this happens every 4 years, Canada's in the World Cup. Of course, we're in the World Cup every 4 years.
Yeah, so fun.
Yeah, it'll be a total blast, right?
Steve, I want to run a unpopular opinion I have by you, and I know it's unpopular because I read some of the comments about my Alphonso Davies tweet on Saturday. I do not believe soccer can become all that it can become commercially in this country, if not this continent, at the U.S. as well, unless it gets a little tougher. unless it gets a little more resilient, unless the players fight through a little bit. International hockey in Europe is different than what we have in the NHL, right? It's been tailored to European taste. Same with international basketball once upon a time. Our sporting values are toughness, fight through, whether it's hockey here, football in the United States. Do you believe that soccer can swim against the current and be everything it can be commercially on this continent without sort of adapting and conforming to the sporting tastes of Canadians and Americans?
I'm going to separate that from the Davies situation. I want to talk about that because I don't think soccer has to be hockey. Like, we don't need Bobby Bond winning the Stanley Cup with a broken leg. It's not, it's different, right? It's just different. And there are lots of guys who have played and fought through injury, and sometimes injuries in soccer are not maybe as obvious sometimes as, Bo Levi Mitchell getting carried off with his foot point the wrong way the other night. Like, it's different. But if you have a serious hamstring injury, it might not look like much, but you still can't play. But the Fonzie thing, I know, look, if I was Canada Soccer, I would want this to just go away, right? I don't want to have this discussion in the middle of this kind of euphoric moment after the World Cup and Canada's performance and everybody blissed out about soccer. And Alphonso Davies is on every other TV commercial right now. But, who pulled Alphonso Davies from that game? Okay? Because but believe me, I've been listening closely. And what I know is that he played in the game before, and he looked pretty good. Actually kind of changed the dynamic on the pitch before that goal against South Africa. I thought, boy, that's, they had to account for him, and that's part of the reason that play opened up for Eustáquio. We know he had an MRI, right before the Morocco game, which was clean, according to Jesse Marsh. And then we know he didn't play. And, in a game where when they were down 1-0, or even at the half when it was 0-0, game was very much in play. Mm-hmm. And Alphonso Davies on the field changes that on the pitch. He's going to change. I'm not saying they would have won, but I definitely want him out there, the best player in Canadian history. So who pulled him? I don't think Jesse Marsh pulled him.
No,
like, he's kind of saying, we didn't want him to hurt him. But what was the conversation here? Like,
that was my question, Steve. Alphonso said the morning of, again, this is according to Marsh, because Alphonso did one media availability that wasn't wrapped around a corporate sponsorship here, Steve, which was, but he said he wasn't confident in his hamstring, didn't feel 100%. Steve, the other thing here is Bayern's next game of consequence is August 22nd, 49 days and 7 weeks away. He's got longer before his next Bayern match than he had rehabilitation coming off the injury in Champions League to prepare for this World Cup.
Okay.
There was a ton of recovery time for a guy whom we needed 20, 30 minutes from.
Can I go here?
Please.
Yeah.
There are no substitutions in soccer, not unlimited substitutions.
There's 5.
Yeah. So if you use up one of those and 5 minutes in, your hamstring blows, guess what? You have sewered your team. You've now made a double substitution in a knockout game. If Alphonso Davies does that and called himself ready and he costs his team a substitution, guess what? He gets labeled as selfish, and he made the moment about him rather than about the team. He made the call that I can't be me. And Stephen, I agree. He made a great play when he got on. 5 minutes after he made that great play, he was a shell of himself, and he was a detriment down that left side. He would not engage in tackles. He was beaten to every single ball. The play fell off the table. That is not a player that was ready to play by any stretch of the imagination. If he was, he would have played. The World Cup is now maybe the one thing that he can still star in. His job has been taken at Bayern. They've signed one of the biggest offseason signings on the planet. His job is gone. This was his chance to reclaim something. If he had it, he would have shown it.
Okay. Steve?
I think you're being generous. I hope you're right.
I agree.
I think you're being generous.
In which case? Generous in which part?
I think if you could, number one, he shouldn't have been on the roster if he couldn't play.
But there's players that didn't even touch the grass, though. Steve. There was lots of room for a hope bet like this. Lots of room.
But if you don't, if in that moment, if he's not going to play, if he's at 75% or whatever he was, like whatever we think he was, in what would have was the defining moment of the tournament for Canada, essentially. Again, they had a shot to win a round of 16 game in the World Cup. They may never have one again. And if he could have given, I think this goes back to the injury that he suffered with Canada and the whole thing with Bayern and all of the mistrust and distrust.
Part of it for sure. Part of it for sure.
Yeah. Yep. But I want to know what that conversation was. I think Jesse Marsh has done his best to kind of make it about something other than Fonzie. And again, this may not be fair, but I can tell you that during the Herdman administration, as flawed as it was, but they did get to the World Cup. There was some stuff behind the scenes with Fonzie and his commitment to the Canadian men's national team. There were some issues.
Well, he didn't want to come for every window. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So to me, that's I again, without saying you're a hockey player, you got to go out there. It doesn't matter if you got a broken nose. I don't think that, but I think if he could play, and again, even look, if 10 minutes of him would have been better than not 10 minutes of him,
for sure,
because they didn't win.
Steve, switching gears here, and lastly, because 40 plus years in the business, newspapers, television, radio, digital, books, you've done it all. Word comes today of the reports are that Vancouver has lost its sports talk radio station, Rogers Sportsnet AM 650, meaning there's not a sports talk radio station here in the third largest market in the country, second largest English-speaking market, and of course, not the only change in the business. Temperature check on the sports media industry in Canada.
Wow, I hate that hearing that news for the people who work there. I was out when they launched, and have been, I know some of the folks there, obviously, and I love radio. I think it's an amazing medium. It's my favorite of all the stuff I've done. I love radio. I love sports radio. I love the kind of the immediacy of it, the pulse of the city kind of stuff when it's good, but yeah, like nostalgia is no refuge anymore, right? Like I can't say, boy, I remember when it was great on radio, man. If something happened, everybody tuned in from their car, and they don't anymore. The pandemic kind of pushed that over the cliff in a lot of ways. That was kind of the last straw, but it was a lot of terrestrial radio was on life support at that point. And, I think that kind of the town square aspect of it, which is different than, look, I used to write a newspaper column and, think, well, people pick up the paper in the morning to see what I think, they're like hours after the event. That's not true anymore either. Right. Yeah. A lot of stuff has changed. But sports radio is a particular space, and the people who are really good at it are real artists. And again, when your team does something good or your team does something bad, you want that place to be with that community. And like half the stuff I've done for a living doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And we love doing this show, but it is different than radio. Like this show is different than radio. Right?
And the audience the audience is different too, Steve. I told the story earlier in the show, but when we first started doing this show in the digital space 5 years ago, and I would go around town, I would get recognized from time to time. And it was my partner, Carmen, who first brought it up to me, who said, all these 18 to 25-year-old kids know you now. She's like, when we used to meet your audience, it used to be guys in their 50s and 60s, like sports talk radio listeners, the Grey Cup crowd, basically. Now, who are these kids who recognize you? Like, it's, you could be their father. And I'm like, yeah.
And Matty, I still get those guys. It's funny, from the years working with McCowan in Toronto on primetime, when it was, it was a great show and he was a great broadcaster. I still get a guy every once in a while. I'll get a guy come up to me like in a bar or at the grocery store or something of a certain age, and I know, like that's where they're coming from, and that's a long time ago now.
Yeah.
Well, so, I have to tell. I've told Matt this story a zillion times. Like I've been on TV for the last 25 years of my life. I almost never get recognized for my face. It's when I am speaking to an employee somewhere, and they're like, "I know that voice." It's radio.
Yeah.
Touches a lot of people, right? Like.
Yeah,
it does.
thank you for this, my friend. Great to catch up again. We'll let you get back to catching out there in Newfoundland, but I appreciate the time, Steve.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, guys. Cheers.